Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Let's see. What does that thing say that you're holding up? Colonial Pen. Worried about final expenses? Take a look at this budget-friendly plan. Oh, that's from Alex Trebek. That's kind of sad because he's no longer alive.
It's a little on the nose. I wonder if it's like, new frontiers in advertising.
On the nose in the sense of, you mean the timing of it?
It arrived like the day that he died, basically.
That's poignant. And I guess...
you don't think it was planned?
I don't think so. There's a lot of that kind of thinking around.
He's been dying for a long time.
I don't see that as part of a marketing strategy. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm expecting one from Saddam Hussein any minute.
Mickey, can I just say I'm a little disappointed? I when I was wondering what wacky and endearing visual gag you would begin the podcast with, I kind of figured you would have a streak running down each side of your... Did you consider that?
I thought of that, but that all those dyes are carcinogenic. And how would I get it off?
That is an excellent question.
I'd look at, and it would drip on my fine garments. So I went with Alex Trebek. Apparently not a big hit.
But did you not hear that apparently, in fact, it was not dye dripping down his... They canvassed some actual hairdressers, and they said it was very unlikely to be dye. Much more likely that it was mascara he had used to touch up his sideburns.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
So you could have done that.
Well, I won't look that bad. I hope.
For 76, Rudy doesn't look bad, I think. Even with streaks running down his face.
He's only 76?
I think so. Why? Does that seem...
Young to me, yes.
Young for someone who gives a press conference of that nature?
He just seems like a guy who's much, much, much older than I am. Anyway, so everybody, I'm getting it from all corners. You must denounce Rudy Giuliani, and I do denounce Rudy Giuliani. It seems like a horrible press conference, and even worse. I mean, Giuliani's just saying he has evidence and he'll either produce it or he won't. But the Trump calling in the state legislators to try to get them to subvert the electoral college outcome is much worse. And everybody on the right is deserting Trump on this. I don't know anybody respectable, including at the National Review or at Powerline, who is defending him. In fact, they're all sort of saying, "Okay, this is it." And the fear, I guess, is that he's going to blow it and blow the runoff in Georgia, which is very important at this point, and he's going to turn off Republican voters and demoralize them instead of inspiring them. So
I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss this. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't be so quick to say that Giuliani's press conference and the Trump strategy are kind of, or the strategy to turn the state legislatures or prevent certification are really two different tracks. And I mean, I think a main function of Giuliani's press conference is to convince Trump supporters that, yes, there is something gravely amiss, and they should put pressure on their state legislators and other officials involved in the certification process. And I think by those lights, it was not necessarily a failure. If you look at that audience for the press conference, I don't think you should be distracted by all these people making fun of his the streaks down the side of his face. They're not the target audience.
I'm being distracted by every right wing commentator, including Tucker Carlson, turning on this lawyer who promised evidence and had wild conspiracy theories and then didn't deliver it. So
that is not good. That is true.
What does your friend Steve Bannon say about all this?
Well, he ain't giving up. I'll tell you that much. And you know, I think I said last week what is now clearer, and I had this insight by virtue of listening to Steve Bannon, that the plan is increasingly just to prevent certification, which is different from convincing state legislatures to actually flip the state, right? I don't think we're talking so much about legislatures taking the votes away from Biden and giving them to Trump. It's just now about not delivering the votes to anyone.
If he actually wants to retain the presidency, the numbers don't work unless they actually give the votes to Trump. Because the rule is whoever wins a majority of the remaining electors who are chosen certified wins. And even if you take out these contested states, Biden has a majority of the remaining electors. The only way Trump wins is if they actually give those contested states to Trump.
Now, is that completely clear? Because I thought that was controversial. But they definitely, if a state fails to decertify, then the threshold drops below 270, the threshold for victory.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've seen it 3 places. That's the rule of 3. It has to be right. But no, maybe there's some crazy legal argument that that's not the case. I've just seen several people debunk this idea.
Bannon claims it's not the case, but he doesn't mount any kind of argument. You got to remember, there's still a lot of states they haven't given up on. If they stop certification everywhere they hope to do it, they might win. They might throw it into the House, even given the fact that the threshold would be lower than 270. Sure,
but that's not going to happen, and B, I don't think it's going to get that much traction with the base. We have a harmonic convergence of topics because this dovetails with the fear which is everywhere, that, including my friends on the right, that Trump has a large cult that is siloed and doesn't get any information from the outside, and that they're enough. And he does have a cult, and they are siloed, but I deny that they are enough to force any state legislature to not certify elected electors.
Okay, but they're not done yet.
I don't think they're big enough. Georgia either. I mean, in Georgia, he has to need more than the base, because he's firing up the Democrats too at the same time as he's allegedly firing up the Republicans. I just think this might have been a huge egotistical miscalculation on his part, that, gee, it helps me, and what's more, it'll be good for Georgia too. Well, I don't think that's the case. I assume the 2 saving graces are, one, that if he drops it in a week, there's plenty of time. I think there's plenty of time to have people in Georgia forget about it. And I assume that people like Karl Rove and his daughter will pay him a visit and convince him that he has a bright future. The bright future ahead, even if he quits. This is more harmonic convergence. It also dovetails with a third story in the week, which is this nurse who claims that people who are dying of COVID say,
this isn't real.
This isn't real. Oh my God. Well, this is Trump saying, oh my God, this isn't real. Give me the miracle cure. Something must happen. This is him facing his political death, which he obviously is not looking forward to.
That was an impressive connection you made there.
Well, I have something to say about the nurse, actually.
Can I first give you some numbers that may make you less dismissive of the possibility that this whole thing could gain momentum in Republican circles? So a Reuters Ipsos poll found that 52% of Republicans thought that Trump had, quote, rightfully won the election. A Politico Morning Consult poll found that 70% of Republicans don't believe the election was, quote, free and fair. This is an Economist poll found that 4 in 5 Trump supporters believe fraud changed the outcome nationally. I mean, these are pretty large numbers of people, and that's the pressure they're going to try. And it could well be growing, is my point. And that's the pressure they're going to try to bring to bear on these various state officials.
There's a difference between thinking there was fraud. I mean, I certainly strongly suspect there was fraud, and thinking that it was enough to overturn the election. I guess that's it. And B, that Trump, has a case that should proceed, and he should win the case and actually overturn the election, even if he can't prove it. It seems to be one of those polls just mentioned the first thing, which is I might even sign off on. And the the only one that seems serious is the last one, the Economist poll. But
okay. Well, let me ask you this: Are you
think those polls will decay?
Last week, you were dismissive of claims that Trump was doing damage to our democracy. Do you think now he's doing damage to our democracy?
Well, if he goes through with the electors thing, yeah, and people take him seriously.
Well, see, I would argue that if you just look at those poll numbers, it's clear he's done damage to democracy. I mean, these people are going to be like permanently aggrieved. And before you just
what makes you think they're going to be permanently aggrieved? And also, there's a reasonable basis for thinking that there was some shenanigans.
Well, there are always irregularities, but that's different from thinking that the election was stolen through, as Giuliani suggested yesterday, a nationally centralized, orchestrated plot. Or this, the thing you mentioned, the woman who, at the same press conference, alleging that there's, that Venezuelan made voting machines or something.
The Dominion theory has been disproved. That's what the hand count in Georgia was designed to do. Dominion has this crazy system where it gives you a paper ballot and then encodes the result in the machine. And the question was, would the paper ballot, which the voter can review, actually be reflected in this mysterious machine code? And if there was a discrepancy, which side would win? Obviously, the paper ballots should win, but the law, I think, says the machine count wins. But there was no discrepancy. The machine seemed to have counted these paper ballots accurately, and if they were programmed to fuck around with the vote, they wouldn't have. So the Dominion thing seems to me is dead.
So are you troubled? So leaving aside, we can maybe get back to this question of how lasting any damage is by virtue of the number of people who now have this grievance. But were you not troubled that Trump called somebody on the board of canvassers in Wayne County, Michigan, who had just voted to certify and apparently convinced her to try to rescind her certification, A, and B, I think at last check he was going to host these two legislators from the Michigan State Legislature and presumably try to convince them to either not certify or actually flip the state.
Well, the latter is, of course, everything is troubling, Bob. It's not a very high bar for me to meet, but the second thing is much worse, it seems to me, because the second thing he's saying is what the legislature in Florida threatened to do in Gore versus Bush, which is, we don't care what the outcome of the election is. We think, in that case, Bush won. In this case, it'd be, we think Trump. We're going to give the electors to Trump, no matter. So what do we have the election for if they're just going to ignore it? So that is deeply undermining.
You don't think the Wayne County thing is troubling?
He's just trying to influence whether people who are in the process to determine whether the election is. No, it's troubling, of course, but it's not as bad as the second one. The second one is a nuclear weapon.
Well, actually, Wayne County would have been the nuclear weapon. I mean, if they don't have the Wayne County votes, I don't think Michigan goes for Biden. If he could hold up the Wayne County certification as he tried to. And the reason I'm asking,
then there'll be a court process in Michigan to try to, count the votes. The Michigan courts are not going to allow all of Wayne County's votes to be thrown out. So there's some process there, and the other one, it subverts the process.
Okay, I guess, as for the word troubling, I guess it seemed to me that last week you didn't even rise to the level of troubled about what Trump was doing with this election.
Correct.
Has your view changed? So you have moved, you now have reached the troubled threshold. This is all, I will rest my case and talk about whatever you want to talk about if we've established that.
Yes.
Thank you. Mickey is troubled. We have our headline.
Jeez.
Troubled in a different sense than we always knew he was troubled.
You can even get me to condemn if you push hard enough.
Okay, will you condemn?
I condemn everything. My point about let me quickly get in my point about the nurse since I brought her up. The the reason the nurses, this is the nurse who went on TV and said she had patients who had COVID who, as you said, all of a sudden say, this isn't real, this isn't happening, give me the miracle cure. My impression is that when you're dying, that very often happens. I've seen it happen in my life. You're dying and you have no hope, and you just suddenly say, Bob, get me out of here. Okay, this is enough. This is a joke. Get me out of here. And Bob has to explain that, no, it's not a joke. And it's a very tough moment. And it's probably what was happening with these COVID people. And it's incredibly offensive I think it's quite offensive for the nurse who must be experienced in these moments to make light of that, to turn it into something political.
I didn't see what she
People who are dying are desperate. They'll grasp at anything.
Yeah, I didn't see what she actually said. It seemed like suspicious to me from the get-go, because I can well imagine myself while dying just saying, I can't believe this is happening. I cannot believe this is... It's like, because you never take dying seriously until it happens. I don't even take seriously that I will be 3 years older than I am now in 3 years.
Yeah. Unless you take LSD, in which case your ego will dissolve and you'll come to see that it's all part of the plan and you'll be resigned to it, right?
We really are moving all over the landscape today, aren't we? There is this interesting, they've done a lot of studies about psilocybin and LSD helping people reconcile themselves to the inevitability of death. They, done these things with terminal cancer patients and so on. So yes, and by the way, interesting thing here in New Jersey. So the referendum to legalize marijuana passed, and they require enabling legislation. And somebody in the state legislature, in the committee that put out the legislation, added the decriminalization, not the legalization, of psilocybin, of mushrooms. So there you go.
Party at Bob's house.
Just in time for my impending death.
Are you? You should. The next podcast, you're going to be having a sort of seance-like experience, right? That's
like a $300 level Parrot Room Patreon tier thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of this toad drug, but wait till you try the parrot drug.
Both. The toad drug is described in the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind. Yes, that is supposedly gives you guaranteed ego death. They should give that to Trump. Give him the toad. The what is it? It's 5-MeO DMT or something like that. MEO5 something.
I could just see the ad from Alex Trebek. Guaranteed ego death.
Yeah.
With Colonial Penn.
Yeah.
Don't worry about your final expenses.
Wait, what is being advertised on that Alex Trebek thing?
Some sort of insurance for your funeral expenses.
Should we pause to pay tribute to him? Oh, it's a funeral thing? Are you serious? I missed that.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
That's the whole point.
Oh, my God.
Worried about final expenses.
Oh.
This is Alex Trebek saying I should,
Well, look, they had known for... I mean, yeah, no, that isn't a coincidence. They had known for a long time that he had cancer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's creepy.
Thank you. I was never an Alex Trebek fan, not that I just never saw him. I was more of a Pat Sajak guy.
Wait, but Pat Sajak never did Jeopardy, right?
No, but they're rivals. They're basically the same. Do
you remember who the original Jeopardy? Oh, this sounds more like the Parrot Room. We should skip it. Anyway, Art Fleming was the original Jeopardy host. Not that I'm old enough to know.
Pat Sajak is a figure on the right. I don't know about Alex Trebek.
But, is Pat Sajak on the right? No, Alex Trebek's Canadian. He would not be too far right.
Pat Sajak has a very funny right-wing Twitter feed.
What about Vanna White?
I don't know. Last I heard, she was on a plane with Nelly, and it was all about the Benjamins. So
and you keep up with a lot of stuff.
That's an old fart rap song, but a great one. So while we're on this silo business, there's a big fuss about Rick Stengel. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Biden is appointing Rick Stengel, I think, head of some sort of State Department international communications. He's
he did something like that in the Obama administration,
right?
In the state, he was the State Department's public diplomacy person or something.
Maybe this is something else. Anyway, They're considering him for a job, and Jonathan Turley attacked him as an enemy of free speech. I should say, caveat, Stengel's been very nice to me, getting me into events, where they're interviewing some politician at a convention, and I don't have credentials, and Stengel will say, "Oh, come on in, Mickey," because I used to write for Newsweek, and he knows me. So he's a very nice guy. Mm-hmm. Nelson Mandela's biographer or co-writer of his biography or something. And former editor of Time, but his piece in the on the op-ed page of the Washington Post really is troubling because for one thing, it conflates two categories. He says he traveled the world, and people asked him, "Well, why do you allow the burning of a Koran?" And he says there's sort of like a fundamental defect, and he couldn't answer them. There's a fundamental defect in the First Amendment. It was built, designed for an earlier time when maybe truth won out, and there's no reason to think truth will beat falsity in the marketplace of ideas, and B, hate crimes hate speech that antagonizes people might cause violence. And he sort of conflates these two ideas, the false speech and the hate speech. And of course, they're not congruent. I mean, you could have false speech that wasn't hate speech and hate speech that wasn't false. And so why you sort of lump them together is wrong.
So wait, let me get clear. This is a Rick Stengel op-ed that he is now being criticized for by people who want him not to get. It was like a year ago.
But
they're now bringing it up to keep him out of the Biden administration?
Correct.
Okay, and he is saying that in his ideal world, was he explicitly saying you wouldn't be able to burn the Quran, or?
He said we should think, he says hate speech laws are very hard to write. We should start the debate and start writing them, basically. He says, let's start the debate. He doesn't say, I'm for them, but basically he obviously is, or else he wouldn't write the op-ed.
Well, I'd have to read it to pass judgment. Of course, a lot of people on the right think flag burning should be illegal, so they're not entirely...
Right, I think they're wrong, too. I mean,
so
I was at one point, because that was one of the big contradictions of Bork. Bork made an exception and suddenly decided that flag burning should be illegal for particular...
During his confirmation hearing?
I think so, and in his book, I remember. I think also in his confirmation hearing. But the key point is this marketplace of ideas, and will truth win out? And the most important book in my college years, the one that you got 20 term papers out of, was a book called The Poverty of Liberalism by Robert Paul Wolff. And he makes the argument that, of course, the idea that truth wins out in the marketplace ideas, the John Stuart Mill idea, that's sort of bullshit. I mean, there's no reason to think the truth will out in the marketplace of ideas. But that's not really why we're for free speech. We are for free speech because the act of speech between two people is a positive interpersonal experience. True or not, we want speech.
Depends on the person.
Well, but in general, it's a good thing, and we want more of it, and we want it to be free because that's part of the positive aspect, and it doesn't matter whether truth wills out in the truth wins out in the marketplace of ideas. It's a positive good in itself.
Wait.
The journey is the experience, Bob.
If that's your defense of free speech, then I would think the validity of the defense could wax and wane as technologies, for example, come along that increase the number of unpleasant interactions between two people, and we have but between the average two people, and we can see how that could happen. It seems to me the most important part of a defense of free speech is just look at the alternative. Right. If you put in someone's hands the ability to tell you what you can and can't say, bad things happen.
I dispute your first point. Why would technology that gives people a bad experience prosper? Do people go on Facebook because they hate it? Wait, I take that back.
This isn't about this isn't about the hunting, is it?
Presumably people will use them because they find they have a positive experience on them. I mean, I go on Facebook saying there has to be a positive experience here somewhere. I'll try again. But I find, the things I use, I wouldn't use them if they were entirely negative.
What do you think, by the way, of this Parler thing. Is that the name of the currently cool right-wing alternative to Twitter?
It got a big boost because of Twitter's ham-handed attempts at censorship.
Right.
I have the same objection everybody has. I don't want to only talk to right-wingers. It's like, if they got some big left-wingers, they should bribe Ezra Klein to go to Parler exclusively or something. Or
I would go for a pretty small amount of money if
Okay, well, there you go. But you're not left-wing enough. You're not an icon.
No, also, I'm not what they want. I mean, it seems to me that the big failure of Parler will be that conservatives don't have anybody to troll. And I'm not that trollable. Neither is Ezra, actually. He doesn't fall for that kind of bait usually. So they need people who are highly reactive and combustible. Not that I'm not by nature both of those, but I just try to not be on Twitter.
To be trollable, you have to have somebody who reacts like a big, slow-moving, heavily bleeding target.
I'm saying the opposite. They need Trump relies on trolling. That's why, if God willing, he should ever leave the White House, my advice to the resistance would be ignore him, ignore him, ignore him. Right. Your rage is his fuel, and that's the problem with Parler. There's no fuel.
I agree with that, but I just say I troll people who don't react, and it's perfectly satisfying.
What, you harass them? You stalk them for not reacting?
No, I write nasty things about them in a retweet with a comment, and that's satisfying in itself. They don't have to respond.
Oh, that reminds me about
if sometimes they block me, which is a problem. That's and Ezra very kindly has not blocked me, but he's eminently trollable. Anyway, but you're right. There's not enough targets in Parler, but I think you can cross posts, so you could handle the problem that way. Yeah,
that reminds me of your tweet, but I guess I failed to copy and paste it.
What tweet?
The tweet where you said something about, quote, the left. You made this ridiculous generalization about, quote, the left.
Didn't make a ridiculous generalization. This was a post by David Atkins, who is certainly a person of the left in American politics, and he said, that this problem of the Trump cult is so great that we have to start thinking in terms of deprogramming and re-education camps. He brought up those words. I didn't.
Oh, here it is.
And you reacting like a standard left-wing troller said, what evidence do you have he's the left? Well, there's tons of evidence that other people on the left have said similar things. We have Robert Wright with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's certainly a person on the left. We have, and the point I was making is I didn't say he was going to have re-education camps. I said they're not satisfied with the victory over Trump. It's sort of too easy.
No, that's not what you said.
They want something more satisfying.
That's not what you said. I found the tweet, actually. I have bad news for you, Mickey. I actually have the evidence. I am better prepared for this conversation than Rudy Giuliani was for his press conference.
Go ahead. You've boasted enough. Go ahead. Deliver the goods.
What you said is a, quote, peaceful transition of power, unquote, is not close to what the left wants.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Two problems with this.
More. They want something emotionally more satisfying than just winning and having Trump leave office and having the Biden administration take office.
Answer that call on speakerphone. Give us a treat. Come on, do it.
Swansea, Massachusetts. I don't know anybody in Swansea, Massachusetts.
You don't now. Give it a try. Okay. My big objection is
you haven't let the record show you have not proved your case. All I said was that winning the election was not enough. They want something more.
As so often happens, you're underestimating the subtlety of my critique, Mickey. My problem is we are using the term the left. I think if you say the left believes this, the right believes this, or black people believe this, or any other such generalization, it should be the case that at least half of them actually do. And the reason this bothers me is because this is a standard talking point on the kind of Steve Bannon right is like, the left is this, the left is that. It's part of this whole crazy demonization process that usually involves various kinds of dishonesty. I'm not saying your tweet involved all of them.
I think half do. And if I
You think okay.
If I redefine the left as being the half that do, then it's 100% of them.
If you... The half of what, though? What's the denominator?
The half of, habitual Democrats.
Okay.
Or Bernie Sanders supporter, whoever you want to define the left.
Okay, but
this is a huge theme of the left. Is we have
they don't really want a peaceful transfer of power.
No,
they want violence.
They want the peaceful transfer. They want not that they want violence. I didn't say that. They want the peaceful transfer of power plus something. Ideally, they want everybody who was for Trump to get down on their knees and cry uncle and confess, but peacefully. But they want some sort of ongoing punishment. That's why we had the Trump Accountability Project, which is a blacklist, so that Trump people couldn't find jobs. That's why we had, that's why we have this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which isn't violent. It's, but it's not something we usually have. It's to go on and browbeat people who supported for Trump. That's why Harvard doesn't want speakers who are pro-Trump on its campus without some sort of special vetting procedure, because they want them further punished, not to be able to get speaking fees, which actually isn't such a bad idea. It's
okay. Sorry,
it's something beyond just winning the election and saying, okay, let's let bygones be, let's carry on the way we usually do.
Okay. I apologize for mistakenly inferring from your saying they didn't want a peaceful transfer of power. I took that to mean that they wanted a transfer of power. That was not peaceful. Silly me. Sorry.
But long before we were having this conversation, I clarified in a tweet that I was talking about some form of informal lustration. Now, I may not have known what lustration meant, but it was clearly peaceful. And lustration seems to mean people don't get jobs, and they can't serve in government. But I also thought it covered the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Not clear to me.
It's a good word.
It does or doesn't.
It's up there with defenestration. So at some point I want to argue that drill down a little more into the damage that I claim is being done enduringly to the Republic.
Okay. Well, now's as good a time as any. I only have
it's also
one more interesting topic to cover.
Why don't you cover it, and then I'll get back to this.
Okay. Well, I mentioned Ezra Klein. As you know, Ezra Klein is leaving Vox, the organization he founded. He follows. Actually,
I didn't know that. Matt Yglesias just quasi-left Vox, except for the podcast, and went to Substack.
Yes. And one more and we'll have a trend, but
what's Ezra doing?
Ezra's going to become an opinion columnist for the New York Times, writing a reported column. And I claim, while that's a very good job, a very prestigious job where you can have a lot of influence, he's leaving this huge organization that he founded and leads, where he has a lot of influence. So I don't think even a column at the New York Times, unless they're going to print it on the front page, is enough to make him ordinarily leave Vox, unless Vox was in financial trouble like Huffington Post. I think both Matt and Ezra see the writing on the wall. They know that Bancroft of Vox can't fund their money-losing site forever, and there's an implosion about to happen, and they don't want to be around when the implosion happens. The implosion already happened at Huffington Post. They basically sold themselves to BuzzFeed for nothing, as far as I can see. My friend John Ellis bid $1. I think he outbid them. He outbid BuzzFeed, but they basically gave themselves to BuzzFeed.
Wait, who went to BuzzFeed for?
Huffington Post.
Okay.
So we have the 5 pillars of the woke press. We have BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Vox, Slate, and there was one other. Maybe there are only 4. And we're in the wokeopolis, where they're all after Trump leaves office, the financial collapse is happening. And I thought they should all merge into one, and they may eventually do that. But so I think basically Yglesias and Klein saw the writing on the wall.
Could be. Wokeopolis is a good word, by the way. But, I mean, Ezra had already stepped away as editor, you know. He was not editor of Vox. He was some kind of editor at large, and I don't think he was very involved in day-to-day affairs, so I'm not sure.
You don't think if he said, I want you to write this article on healthcare reform that I can't write, they wouldn't do it? No, of course they would do it. So I'm sure he had assignment powers that magnified whatever he would put in his own column.
I don't know how much of that there was. Look, New York Times is a great platform to be on. Makes sense to me.
They have so many columnists now. I mean, they don't all make the printed edition.
No.
And so you're one of 100 columnists of the New York Times. I mean, eventually they have so many that it's not that great a job. It's mainly that great a job because there's so few of them.
Well, there's also the question of what happens in the New York Times if indeed Trump should leave the White House. What happens to the whole business model once the rage diminishes considerably, and yet they have now basically turned themselves into a, partisan newspaper, more or less.
Let the record show that all the people who are complaining about people don't trust the media anymore, in part that's because the media have made themselves untrustworthy. I used to, even under the early Pinch Sulzberger regime, I trusted the New York Times. If I read something, I figured that had happened. That's no longer true. It has to be a specific reporter who I trust, and then I trust it. But there are very few of those. So, and CNN is much worse. So there is no trusted media voice anymore. And then the people at these untrustworthy media voices complain that people don't trust the media anymore. Well, how about making yourself trustworthy?
No, that's a problem. Glenn Greenwald was talking about this on a podcast he was on, that these days when something happens, whether it's Hunter Biden, something you'd like to get to the bottom of, Hunter Biden, or was there fraud in the election, there's like no outlet that you actually trust with resources to actually get to the bottom of the question.
Hunter Biden's a very good example, because the Journal is one of those places you would ordinarily trust, yet they just published this conclusory thing. We find no evidence of Joe Biden being involved in the corporate records we've perused. Well, that doesn't answer the question. It was obviously just an executive decision to shut this down. So if you can't trust the Wall Street Journal, then you're pretty much out of options.
I think they are still pretty good. I mean, the repertorial section of the paper, obviously to be distinguished from the kind of crazy opinion section, I think they're better than
the opinion section, too.
Of course you would. Just to reinforce.
No, they don't have they're not as crazy as they were under their previous editor, Bartley.
They no longer support the gold standard?
I don't know. I don't never read their actual editorials, but their op-ed page.
Don't let that stop you from judging.
Their op-ed page run by James Taranto is quite good.
Has its moments.
Okay, but go ahead.
No, I just wanted to compare. I felt for a long time now that the spectrum of credibility goes among the big three: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and the reported sections goes from New York Times, lowest credibility, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. And I just noticed a contrast in headlines between the Times and the Post that I thought kind of made the point. The Times headline: Trump tries to subvert the election, inviting Michigan GOP lawmakers to the White House. Now, I agree that the word subvert is actually accurate. I don't think it's appropriate for a straight news outfit to make that judgment. However, the Washington Post writes, Trump uses power of presidency to try to overturn the election and stay in office. To me, that's a slightly more palatable headline for a straight news outlet.
Right. But the Post is pretty awful often. But first I want to say that Times editorial they cranked it up another notch of craziness yesterday, because it had things like, it said his overwhelming victory in Michigan. Well, Biden's overwhelming victory in Michigan. Well, it wasn't overwhelming. It was like 3%. So that's not overwhelming in my book. But they're like turning up all the dials of hysteria. But the Post is pretty awful. I mean, everything is race and part of Trump's racism. And the worst was when he went to Mount Rushmore and gave a speech that didn't mention race and sort of purposely avoided race, they nevertheless ran the pre-Wright, which is, oh, this is all about racism.
I don't think the Times is averse to that. I mean, I think the Post is less likely to refer to Trump's false claim of fraud and more likely to call it baseless or something, which I think is a little better. My preference would be unsubstantiated. That's the proper word when someone has not yet provided evidence, but in theory, the evidence could exist. Unsubstantiated, but you almost never see that word in the media now.
It's too long.
Okay.
No, you're right. I was
trying to
unproven. There you go. I was trying to figure out when this started. When did the press start to go crazy? Speaking specifically of the Times. And when was the earliest time I remember the Times being crazy? And it was in the Bush administration, the W. Bush administration, not the H.W. Bush administration. And the question, is it just the product of the Iraq War? No, it can't be, because the Times was sort of pro-Iraq War in a lot of ways. It was the Bush and the deficits and the cuts, and it was a domestic campaign against George W. Bush's domestic agenda, which may have predated 9/11. And was it just the product of Democratic rule coming to an end, or that the Bush v. Gore nastiness bled over? But that's when I remember that it's starting to go crazy.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it got way crazier with Trump when they started using the word lies to refer to things people said that were false without knowing really whether there was conscious knowledge that the information was untrue, and in which case the word lie is not appropriate. They really ratcheted it up. And I also think you kind of saw you saw these big media outlets kind of being bullied into it. I mean, like pressure would build on Twitter. I think Twitter played a big role, and some of these media watchdogs like Jay Rosen, who I think maybe is at NYU. I mean, I had coffee with him once. Perfectly nice guy, but I don't think he's ever, as I said before, either here or in the parrot room, I don't think he's ever worked at a newspaper. And he has this idea that basically every story should be an editorial that reflects his point of view. That's a slight caricature. But anyway, my point is the paper started getting all this heat from social media, and you saw them responding to it like in real time. More of them started using the word lies. NPR, by the way, deserves credit for having held out. They do not refer to what Trump says as lies.
Well, and they were very proud of it. They would congratulate each other.
They deserve
hell of a lead on this piece if somebody used the word lies. So there's sort of a self-congratulatory circle that forms in between major papers.
And relatedly, do you remember the New York Times piece where somebody went out and talked to this guy who, I don't know if he was officially a neo-Nazi or what, but he either was or he was kind of in that realm, and it was an attempt to understand, like, how did he get here? What's he like? And he turned out to be in many ways a normal human being. I personally think that is a great object lesson, that it isn't like this Manichaean universe where there's these evil people and there's us. Any ordinary person can, under the right circumstances, drift toward what I would consider the dark side. I think that's important, but I don't know if you remember this piece, but the Times took a ton of shit for it, and they apologized for it. They apologized for good reporting. Yeah. And that's just the way it's been. They are. But
did that affect, like, one of the worst things they've done is get rid of James Bennett after publishing that content?
I think that is of a piece.
Was that Twitter driven? My impression is that was internally driven.
Well, the Nazi piece was also partly internally driven. There was blowback, I am told, by reliable sources, not just from the reporters, but apparently it comes from everybody. People on the ad side, just there was staff blowback. There was also a ton of Twitter blowback, and they chickened out.
But then it's hopeless because all those people are still there. So even if Twitter goes away, the internally driven bias will prevail.
Well, certainly in James's case, that was largely internally driven. I think the publishers fear the whatever the nickname is for the most recent generation of Sulzberger czars. It's not Punch or Pinch. Does he have a nickname?
No, I was trying to think of one. I didn't.
It's Son of Pinch. Son of Pinch Sulzberger.
The Pinchette.
The Pinchette Sulzberger. He
Pinchito.
He took the pulse.
Let's not be feminine about it.
I mean,
Pinchito.
remember, the staff tried to turn it into a racial issue. They said the black members of the staff feel threatened. James had run a piece by Tom Cotton amid all the protests and the disorder, advocating sending federal troops into cities. That was the controversial thing. You can argue it either way, but I don't think it's a firing offense. I mean, the guy, Tom Cotton, is a U.S. senator. You can certainly make the case that we should know what our U.S. senators are thinking and let them say it. They got elected. But in any event, the case was made, the black members of the staff feel threatened by the possibility of federal troops in the cities, which is, first of all, there may be blacks who have reason to feel threatened. I don't think they're the ones who are reporters at the New York Times. Secondly, if some middle-aged white guy should have to resign over a case that is in some sense about privileged whites, arguably it should be a Sulzberger, but I digress.
Are you saying that Pinchito played a bad role in this?
Isn't it Punchito? Did you say Pinchito? Oh, you're right. Okay, it's Pinch, because it was Punch and then Pinch, and now
it could be either one.
Wait, we said Pinchette. Make up. Is it?
I think Pinchito is more.
Pinchito is definitely better,
more respectful,
and that's what we aim for on our podcast. So Pinchito Sulzberger. Go ahead. I just started.
Are you saying he played a nefarious role? He just didn't have a lot of balls in terms of standing up to the staff.
He did the firing. He's the publisher.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. He didn't apparently have the nerve to let the moment pass. I just did a dialogue with Greg. Is it Lukianoff?
I think so. Yeah.
Something. The co-author of The Coddling of the American Mind. He said one thing people don't realize is if you just wait a couple of days, things subside. It's like, just don't fire anybody for a couple of days, and things will subside. And
this dovetails into your point about silos and right-wing delusion, because my claim is things will subside. People will stop freaking out about the election being stolen from Trump, and the 45% who think it now will dwindle to 20%, and we can handle that.
20% is a big problem, first of all. But I would like to get into the dynamics by which, and this is not just to sound an alarm about the fate of the republic. I really think that people who are left of center should understand what they're going to be up against in the coming years, and why they're up against it. There are, I think, as those numbers I trotted out suggested, a lot more people than some people on the left realize who genuinely think the election was stolen, and they're going to think that for a long time. And so here's how it happens. And I think, by the way, this is partly I don't know. I'll save that question for last. So the other day I was curious about what was going on in the Georgia recount. So I go to Twitter and search for Georgia recount. And I get what I see. These are the top tweets. They're ranked in terms of how much action they're getting.
Is that how they're ranked? I never figured out how much.
That's certainly a big part of the display.
I think
it has
it's
to
random.
be. No, it's not random. It's not random. It may not be purely
okay.
But quantitative, a kind of how much action they're getting, but that's a big part of it. And what I saw was a bunch of people on the right, on the Trump right, doing tweets like, "Oh, who would have guessed they found another county where there were 1,500 votes they hadn't counted, and most of them are for Trump." Okay? And you weren't seeing this in my Twitter feed, But clearly you were seeing it in the other ecosystem. Now, partly because you weren't seeing it in my Twitter feed, nobody on my side was evaluating the validity of the claim. If you had evaluated it, this is what you would have probably concluded. So what happened? So in several counties, there were a non-trivial number of votes that they found that they'd failed to count. In 2 counties, it was actually over 1,000. That's significant. And the votes they found mostly went to Trump. And so on the right, they're thinking, oh, they had tried to conceal these votes. Okay, why did they overwhelmingly go to Trump? Because those were counties in which Trump won the overwhelming majority of the vote, which probably means, although I didn't verify this, that those are counties run by Republicans and perhaps by specifically pro-Trump Republicans. In any event, this is not consistent with the Trump narrative that in Democratic-controlled counties and cities, that's where the fraud took place. This is just incompetence by Republican officials. And if you were a Democrat who actually wanted to weave this into a conspiracy theory, what you could say is, well, isn't it interesting that in counties where Republicans are doing the manual recount, they're finding a bunch of votes that are for Trump that they just hadn't noticed before, right? So if anything, what's actually happening here supports either a Democratic conspiracy theory or points to Republican incompetence. Those are the 2 most logical interpretations. But the way it's playing out in the Trump ecosystem, nobody's examining it that closely. And I assure you, tons of people are adding it to a bunch of, quote, evidence they see, including stuff Rudy Giuliani trotted out at that press conference. And when you add it all up, there's a lot of it. I mean, I could go through these categories of evidence. In fact, I might want to do that quickly and show you why a lot of it isn't worth paying attention to. But I'm telling you, over in the other media ecosystem, they are being flooded with this. And if I were one of them, I would be persuaded, because that's all they're seeing. It seems credible. So, for example, they have a poll watcher testifying that X, Y, and Z happened. Well, as I explained last week, for months, Steve Bannon, who has a big audience when you add up YouTube, podcast, Newsmax TV, everywhere his show is, he has a big audience and a cult-like following, and a following of people some of whom are certainly inclined to conspiracy theories to begin with, if they find his content appetizing. He has been saying, you got to sign up to be poll watchers, because, there's going to be a ruckus after this. The real actions after the election. We got to have our troops out there. You got to sign up to be a poll watcher. So these people who are conspiracy minded to begin with, okay, are definitely represented among these poll watchers. And now we see poll watchers saying that crazy things were happening. Now, half the time, I'm sure they believe it. They're the type who see conspiracies everywhere they look. But that's a whole nother category of evidence that is persuasive when you hear it, because for all you know, they're telling the truth.
I'm sure all these things happen. Look at the overall result. The overall result was as centrist a result as you could possibly imagine. Voters, the vast majority of voters, they picked the most boring politician they could find, installed him as president, and they emasculated him by denying him the legislative troops that he would need if he was going to pursue the most left-wing agenda. So the overall outcome should pour a lot of cold water on all these fears, because we read about the affidavits and the people on Twitter who are the most linked, but those aren't the voters. The vast majority of the voters are middle-of-the-road schlubs like they always were, apparently.
I don't understand how you're dismissing my fears about what has happened since the election on the basis of what happened during the election.
Because there was crazy shit happening before the election, too, and the people discounted it.
Well, I frankly find it troubling that 70 million people could vote for Donald Trump after all the crazy shit he did. I mean, I don't think I'm not dismissive of them, because, as I just tried to explain, I understand how, given, first of all, some legitimate grievances some of these people have, that led them to Trump in the first place. And secondly, given the way the media ecosystems operate, I understand how they could come to the conclusion that you should vote for him. I still find it troubling when you look at the kind of
You're talking to one of them, Bob.
Well, I find you troubling. God,
yeah, okay.
I mean, you're the most mysterious case of them all.
But I mean, people. Obviously, my answer is people found were troubled also by what they thought might happen under Biden, so they picked what they thought was the lesser of two evils. But I do think Trump is acting a qualitative amount crazier now than he was before the election.
I think he's
and so it's if they voted for Trump now after the Giuliani press conference, if 70 million voted for him, I would be a whole lot more troubled than I was that 70 million voted for him when they did.
I'm telling you. Well, go ahead.
I have a taxi driver anecdote, which is I got my haircut and my barber said, I voted for Trump, but he lost. He should be a man. Accept defeat. Time to move on.
You can be a New York Times columnist. That's like
there you go. I got
that's a better than average Tom Friedman lead right there.
That's a Nick Kristof reported column right there.
Now, Tom Friedman is the classic cab driver guy.
So anyway, but I just think there are a whole lot of people like the person who cuts my hair, and she did a good job too, don't you think?
I think you could use some streaks down the side of your face,
Okay,
but
anyway.
Aside from that, and speaking of which, this is an excellent transition. I'm telling you, if you just watch the Giuliani press conference and you don't happen to tune in to Tucker Carlson pointing out that lady is crazy, well, he didn't quite put it like that, but casting doubt on her, somebody you trust casting doubt on her. The Giuliani press, it's like this one thing Giuliani keeps saying. Sounds persuasive, and it's almost funny the extent to which he continues to rely on it, since I don't think he's clueless enough to think it's valid, but he really puts a lot of emphasis on it whenever he talks about Pennsylvania. Trump was ahead by 700,000 votes, and then the margin just suddenly disappears. Let me just recount my experience the morning after the election. I got up, I saw that Trump was ahead by about 750,000 votes in Pennsylvania. I knew that the mail-in ballots were going to favor the Democrats. I started actually looking at the successive tranches of votes that came in and seeing what percentage of Democrat were Democrat. It was like 70, 75, 68, 77. I'm like, okay, at this rate, Biden should catch Trump, given how many votes are outstanding. A, and B, I went back and looked at the publicly available records about what percentage of returned mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania were from registered Democrats, and the numbers made total sense. It's exactly the numbers you would have predicted. And so there's absolutely zero mystery here. And it's an interesting question whether Giuliani, what explains this? Dishonesty, stupidity, what? But I'm telling you, you hear him say this. If you're a Trump supporter, it is another thing that revs you up. And I just think, and remember, Trump, if you think he's crazy, I mean, first of all, if you think he's acting crazily, A, I would say he's acting exactly the way he's always acted, just in a new context, A. And B, it could make a kind of tactical sense. If he wants a highly energized base of aggrieved people to drive Trump TV or whatever his post-White House life
right.
is.
And I worry that goal conflicts with the goal of winning the election in Georgia. And he may
I am less troubled by that prospect, but I seriously doubt it'll happen. I mean, first of all, my favorite candidate, the black minister whose name escapes me, is I think is going to get Reverend Wrighted. If you remember Jeremy Wright. In fact, the parallels are similar, are kind of eerie, because Jeremy Wright. What did he say?
Was it Jeremy?
It's not Jeremy.
Jeremiah? I don't know.
Well, Jeremiah is a good word to use here, because my point was going to be that biblical prophets said about Israel exactly what he said about America, but
apparently he's hilariously funny.
Who the
right.
Georgia guy?
Right. No, right.
Oh,
and the Georgia guy just seems like a good guy. Just the affect, his affect is good.
Well,
but I never understand. I don't know whether this sort of negative attack has that dramatic effect. I guess we'll see.
I mean, what he said was you can't serve the military and serve God. You can't serve money and serve God. He didn't say you can't serve in the military. He said something that I think is most Christians in principle believe, which is that God is the ultimate authority. You can't substitute any authority for God. But
he seems a little woke for my taste, and I assume
I
George's
suggested
taste,
that last week, that I'd heard he's very far to the left and that could hurt him. And in light of this, I don't know why you're so worried that he could win in Georgia.
Well, because Trump might demoralize Republicans. It's possible Trump will even sabotage Republicans. And Democrats are fired up. This is their chance. Trump is fulminating about taking back the election. This is their chance to slap him across the face and also to recover a bit of the victory that they were denied on Election Day when they thought they were going to sweep the Senate and they didn't. So if I were a Democrat, I would, definitely be fired up. And Republicans have always won these runoffs, but they didn't have the mail-in threat that they have now. I mean, now, we have Democratic activists running around ginning up the mail-in vote. One positive thing I think about this is any idea that the Democrats are going to push through a national mail-in or universal mail-in requirement is dead unless they get a filibuster-proof, majority. They eliminate the filibuster or get 60. The Republicans are never going to go along with universal mail-in requirements for a generation. So,
yeah,
I think mail-in is rife with fraud. I'm for that.
Well, it's an interesting case. In Georgia, there are a couple of these legal cases or a couple of challenges, and this is what worries me about the prospects for Trump actually succeeding in overturning the election. I mean, what reassures me is that I'll check the betting markets now, but they have been getting less favorable to Trump over the last couple of days. But what worries me, I mean, I just should quit listening to Steve Bannon. He's just good at getting me worried because he does such an effective job of whipping up the troops. But there are a couple of things. Oh, the odds are getting even worse for Trump. They're now down below 4%, his chances. Thank you, Jesus. The sorry, I didn't mean that offensively to anyway.
I guess I should say the number of the percent of people in the population who think the election was stolen from Trump because of the sequence you cite, where the in-person voting numbers came in before the mail-in voters, and the mail-in voters put Biden over the top. I would say it's 20% of the right, which means it's 10% of the population. Don't worry so much about it.
That's a ton of people, Mickey. That's a ton of people.
Not enough to carry the election, and they're not crazy people. As you know, even Nazis are people, Bob. And these people are Nazis. They just happen to be...
I'm not doubting that they're people.
Feel that the election was funny.
There's just so many things that trouble me about this, including, these little things Trump is trying, the norms violations he's trying, having these state legislators over,
Well, he tries everything. That's how he was successful on immigration,
that's what's dangerous as a president.
He tries everything. If he tries A, he tries B, he tries C, he tries D. On immigration, B was a disaster. B was family separation. Then he tried C. Then he tried D, which is a crazy threat against Mexico with tariffs, and that worked.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about the norms.
You're never going to find out what works.
I'm talking about violation. Method. I mean, I know norms has become a cliche, but it is true.
Well, the family separation violated norms, too. Yes, he violates norms.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the norms that sustain democracy itself, the electoral process itself. Those are the ones he's trying to chip away. Now, there is such a thing as a norm violation that winds up upholding the norm because it gets such effective blowback. I don't think that's going to be the case here. He may be setting dangerous precedents, and I don't feel we're out of the woods yet. It's not impossible that he could stage a comeback.
I agree that it's dangerous, and I agree that it's an important norm, but I think there is close to zero chance, maybe the betting markets are right, 4%, that he will succeed. I'm with Mark Elias, the Democratic election law lawyer, and financier of the dossier, who I normally don't like, who said, look, it's hopeless for Trump. There's no way he's going to win this. Don't worry about it. This strategy is going to fail. I think he's completely right.
I should concede that there are some of the, as I was starting to say, some of the things that they're trying, their last gasp efforts, do not depend on kind of the testimony of people who may or may not be crackpots or Rudy Giuliani's weird math or so on. I mean, first of all, there's a kind of, I guess, interesting suit in Georgia where this guy Lynn Wood is making the case in court that, there was apparently Stacey Abrams sued, I guess she sued Georgia after her election about the eligibility, the process of balloting, something. And she and the Secretary of State reached a consent decree in court that had some influence on how the mail-in ballots were handled or something. And he's making the case that this violates the Constitution because the Constitution says the state legislature should set the procedure of elections. That's kind of interesting. There's something in Wisconsin where they claim they can actually show that although the state law, as I understand it, although the state law dictates that you have to request a ballot to mail-in ballot to mail one in, to get one, they claim they can demonstrate to tens of thousands of people, did not request them, but got them and mailed them in. I still think getting a remedy for that would be challenging. But
the remedy is a problem in the first one, too.
Yeah.
Obviously, they relaxed something happened, and the number of ballots that were thrown out by signature, because of signature mismatch, like your daughter's, I believe, were...
hers was put in the Twilight Zone and was cured.
Was cured, okay. So the Stacey Abrams decision said you can't even throw them out initially unless you get more than one inspector and they agree by majority vote. And the argument is that was too cumbersome. Basically, they gave up. No inspector said, okay, I'm going to stop everything and convene a meeting with my fellow inspectors, one of which who has to be in the other party, and we're going to throw this ballot out. So they basically gave up. But I think they gave up throughout the United States. I think the throwing out of mail-in ballots sort of went way down. And I just don't see how you throw out those ballots. What are you going to do? We don't know anymore which ones they are. So we're going to throw them all out, or we're going to count them all. And I think you have to count them all.
That's true.
That's a big problem with mail-in ballots.
I think in Wisconsin you might be able to know what percentage of them were registered Democrats, but that can't be the basis for anything. Or the fact that it was in a county that went 80% Biden. I don't think that lets you throw out any actual ballots as a practical matter.
I mean, I told you what happened to my reader whose dead father voted, and the Board of Elections said, hey, well, it doesn't matter. Some other guy voted this who didn't vote his own ballot, voted your father's ballot. Yeah, but what about the signature verification? Obviously, that didn't happen. They didn't care about that. So the mail-in ballot, it's basically an argument for stopping mail-in balloting in the future, I think.
Well, it is more prone to either that or tightening up certain things about it. I mean, for example, you can have, I think my daughter's signature, when it was initially rejected, that was a machine that did the rejecting. You can have AI mass compare signatures. I guess that's happening in some places and not in others. There's things you can do, but anyway, I don't know. I don't have anything else. I urgently, we're well over an hour now. At some point, we could just do this in the Parrot Room. I would like to talk about Substack newsletter strategy in light of the fact that now suddenly everyone, you and I can both say we were on Substack before it was cool. We can also say that we failed to turn it into a huge moneymaker back before a lot of other people did, and have continued to fail. But now that Matt Yglesias is gone there and so on, I'd like to talk about that. Did you have you had an issue come out? You had a newsletter come out this week, didn't you?
I did. We can talk about that, but the interesting thing is this shows that the woke employees of these organizations aren't going to go away because, they won the election. Okay, Substack is now the redoubt of people who don't want to be mau-maued by by woke millennials, and the woke millennials have now turned their guns on Substack and saying, where are the people of color writing for Substack, etc. There was a ridiculous article in Columbia Journalism Review. So,
well, wait,
they're not going to go away, and they have to shoot at something, so they're going to shoot at Substack now.
That article didn't really do a lot of complaining about wokeness. It did, it kind of characterized Andrew Sullivan in unflattering terms. But
it went into the whole bell curve thing, and
when it mentioned Andrew, I wouldn't call it a lot of pressure. I don't. Substack shows no signs so far of surrendering to either wokeness or anti-wokeness,
or being bought by Twitter, which would be just as
they
bad.
deny that they could be bought by Twitter. So I should plug my these things we're doing on my newsletter, the Nonzero newsletter. These progressive realism report cards we're giving to various prospective Biden advisors. We did Tony Blinken last week. Did you know that he Blinken himself, who may be the next national security advisor, Secretary of State, caught wind of that and commented? Caught wind
very
of our
quickly in a very winning, humble way, I thought.
I mean, it's funny. We gave him a low grade, but the way he responded was so diplomatic in terms of
he praised your book.
He praised my book, and so that makes it hard for me to trash him on Twitter.
One of your books. He would have gotten more points if he'd praised one of the more obscure ones. Instead, he praised the most popular one.
Yeah, well, we'll do other.
If he praised Nonzero or Evolution of God, that would have gotten him huge points.
He did not get a grade upgrade on the basis of praising only one book. But anyway, we're going to do William Burns next in a newsletter come out within the next few days.
You got to do Susan Rice next because it's Susan Rice versus Tony Blinken for the big jobs.
Oh, I don't think it's that simple. Okay. I mean, Susan Rice could face trouble from a Republican Senate because of the Benghazi obsession.
Right.
So I think on Secretary of State they could wind up waiting until they see who's running the Senate. I don't know, but whereas the Secretary of Defense seems less subject to that, given who's in the running.
Who is the Treasury Secretary? He said he has one.
I forget. Has he said who the name is?
No, he has. I would remember if he said the name.
Well, that's reassuring. Then I didn't forget.
He said he has one who's widely acceptable to all factions, which rules out Elizabeth Warren. So who is it? I mean,
well, I think what she should be is Attorney General and exercise her antitrust impulses. But I don't know.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah. That's very popular these days to break up big tech companies. She would be good at that.
Well, she's basically a Naderite nerd, and that's a perfect job for that person. You should promote that. That's a good idea.
I'm not the first. I don't think I'm the first to say it, but
I
haven't heard it in a while. I heard it months ago. So anyway, what was in your newsletter, or at least give us the name of your newsletter?
Oh, my newsletter is called Kausfiles. I had three ideas. Two of them I think I broached on the show. One is this theory that the reason the Democrats lost is just because Democrats didn't vote for the down ballot because mail-in voters were less interested in voting for the down ballot. They just wanted to vote for Biden and go home and be done with it. And I had one reader very kindly sent information from his own county, which seemed to show that there was actually less drop-off for the mail-in ballots, although it didn't break it down by party. That said evidence against it. And then there was an article by Joan Walsh in The Nation where she had Democrats complaining, well, the Democrats didn't vote for the down ballot, so that affirms it. So I think the jury is still out on that. It doesn't mean that Trumpism without Trump isn't the popular position. It's just a question of how do we arrive there? Did we arrive it because Republicans voted for Trumpist candidates but not for Trump himself, or just because the Democrats don't bother to vote for down ballot? Either way, the result was Republican candidates win down ballot and not at the top, and Trump didn't win at the top. And the second thing was, I think this joke idea I had of there's so many people applying for slots in the Biden administration, they should start a second shadow government, a sort of B team to give them all, handle all the people whose mouths need to be fed, and so he doesn't have to tell no to so many of them. And I forget what the third item was. It was so moving and
memorable. We should maybe tell people that it was discovered in the Parrot Room, which we record after this every week, that my dismissal of one of your arguments had been premature, and it had turned out to be logically airtight, and I just hadn't grasped it. Do you remember that?
That's the first item was an attempt to respond to your objection. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The idea was. So what you were saying that the roll off on the Democratic side, that is to say people voting for Biden but not for lower tier candidates, explained. Wait, tell us again.
Explains why the Democratic lower tier candidates lost, whereas Biden won, and it's all explained by the Democratic side. The Republicans could have voted straight ticket, Trump and the lower down.
No, it's clear that
candidates.
It explains that, but you were arguing something else. You were arguing. That it explains why Trump was outperformed by Republican senators and House and people in the House.
Outperformed in the sense that he lost and they won. I don't know.
No.
The raw numbers.
No, give yourself more credit. I thought you were saying. Well, okay, yeah, fine. We'll leave it at that. But I didn't get that logic at the time, and you hadn't mounted the counter logic that I succumbed to in the Parrot Room.
It can be empirically disproven if it's proven that 30% of Republicans voted for Biden and Republicans down ballot split their ticket. Then the theory is, as some candidates claimed and canvassers, then it's disproven. But all the data is the split ticket voting is going down, down, down. If it shows that it blew up this year, then the theory blows up too, I think.
Okay. I mean, I guess what I was thinking is it doesn't just explain.
And it's Walter Shapiro's theory. It's not my theory.
Okay. So the roll-off theory, what I was thinking is it doesn't just explain why Trump lost and they won, but why I think he outperformed his polls by less than they outperformed theirs. And that I hadn't wrapped my mind around why it explains that, but I think it does. Anyway,
it gets rid of a lot of ideological explanations, like Democratic voters were repulsed. They were for Biden, but they were repulsed by AOC and the far left. Okay, no, they just didn't bother to vote. It's not that they were repulsed, although maybe that's why they didn't bother to vote, but I doubt it. And it gets rid of a lot of ideological takes on it, some of which I like. It's sort of a mechanical explanation.
Okay, so there's a point I want to make about that. Maybe we'll save it for.
You got to save everything for the Parrot Room. We have nothing left to talk about there.
The Parrot Room. This is true.
We're in trouble.
Other self-promotion. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Parrot Room.
We're going to have to talk. We're going to have to talk about our adolescent sexual experiences, like Obama does in his new biography.
Well, let's talk about that in the. I hope, but we should dig up that quote from his thing and talk about it in the Parrot Room. It was kind of gross. Not in the sense. I don't find it gross in the sense that a lot of people did. Just gross. Not even gross. I'll figure out what the word is in between now and the Parrot Room. Anyway, people can support us on Patreon whether or not they want to take all of the bait we're laying out for actually going to the Parrot Room. They could just support us because they think that the more money we have, the better.
The Parrot Room is the bag man for this podcast.
Like you know who?
Anthony Ulasowitz.
I was thinking of Hunter Biden.
Okay.
Yes. And also rate and review us. Well, rate and review the Wright Show, which is what this is. It's also Blogging Heads. Also smash the like button. Anything else?
No, my Substack is called Kausfiles at Substack. It's free.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not for long, but it's free now.
And mine you can get either at Substack or you can go to nonzero.org and see the archives. And so we will see you, I guess, in the parrot room, Mickey.
Yep.
See you.